All right, everyone. Welcome to the 40th episode of LA Rams Central. I'm 10 away from a milestone. Looking forward to the 50th and then maybe eventually the 100th. But right now, the 50th is on the horizon, so I'm pretty excited about that. So without further ado, let me go ahead and address just a few things. So today's show is going to be pretty short. It's going to be pretty simple. I have a draft breakdown part 2. With some draft analysis from other people. And I have an interview with Cooper Kupp. And for me, it's now time to transition from what the Rams should have done and what they did do and the ramifications of it. And next week's show is going to be a 2-part show. I'm going to break down a 22-minute interview process with Les Snead and Sean McVay, the Rams GM and head coach, going back and forth discussing the draft process. I'm going to pick a little bit apart. I'm going to pick apart about a little bit about what they say and kind of go into detail. I'm going to try to translate it from coach speak to normal speak for you and try to give you a little more in-depth idea into what they were talking about, because I think sometimes they speak over the fans' heads, and unless you really are into the game, you could easily misinterpret or misunderstand something that was said. So I'm going to try to clear that up for you. So that's going to be 2 parts. The first half, which will be the first 11 minutes, and then the second 11 minutes will be the second show, which will air the following week. And then I'm going to do a breakdown on Jared Goff. I'm going to show you some highlights of what he did last year that was good through some video. I'm going to basically break down his mechanics and play a couple of videos about how he's progressing and where he's moving forward. So that's going to be a breakdown of that show. But this show is pretty straightforward. It's going to be my reanalysis, because I did get some information. I do want to clarify my grade and change it slightly. Still not good. And then get into an explanation onto why. And then a breakdown with the interview with Cooper Kupp. And that's the show. So it should be about a 25, 30-minute show. Hope you guys enjoy segment 1 coming right up. So first, somebody gave me some important information and told me that the Rams had let go of Lance Kendricks, something I should have known, and I apologize to you guys for not having that information last week on the ready. I should have known that. That does change a little bit about the Rams going after a tight end. It does become a position of need at that point because they only have 2 and you need to have 3 on your roster. If not, well, let me rephrase that. You have to have 3 on your roster if you're going to run the offense that Sean McVay wants. So tight end was a position of need. I'm just not sure that the Rams should have gotten a guy in the second round that they probably could have gotten in the 3rd or 4th. But I guess they didn't like the tight end pool that was out there in the NFL, although Gary Barnidge is available. So I guess the Rams felt like they wanted to kind of get their own piece. Whatever the case may be, passing up on Forrest Lamp and then Dan Feeney still doesn't change it much. It goes from an F+ to a D-, but it's still a poor grade. The next thing that I'm going to go to, you're going to see it, is a clip of somebody else giving the Rams the draft analysis, and then I'll do my final bit, and then the second part of it's going to be moving on to bigger and better things, and a little bit of look at Cooper Kupp, who, again, guys, I want to clarify, I don't think is a bad talent. I just don't think we needed to reach for him in the 3rd round. I think he could have been there in the 4th or the 5th. And if he wasn't and you miss him, that's the risk you take when you have so many holes that you need to fill. The Rams need to address what they need to address. We already have a slew of wide receivers. Some are unproven. And next year's draft is so loaded in offensive weapons and offensive talent, including the O-line, that the Rams needed to make sure they got these picks right so next year they can start drafting for luxury rather than another year that's going to be a down year and some need, especially now that you've got San Diego in your backyard. I've never been in this position where I've hoped I was wrong so much, but I really hope that my predictions on Forrest Lamp and Dan Feeney are wrong, and that these guys are sieves and are going to be out of the league in 3 or 4 years, like some linemen, or end up like a Greg Robinson, just a total bust and a fall flat on their face. I doubt it, but I'm hoping like heck that I'm wrong. But anyway, here's some other people breaking down the Rams draft. Here you go.
Draft breakdown for the Los Angeles Rams. Pete, no first-round pick after the Jared Goff move last year. How do you think Sean McVay, Les Snead, and company did here?
Well, it was clear what their task was to get more weapons for their quarterback. I mean, you go get Jared Goff last year, you got to get him more weapons. They got Gerald Everett in the second round, of tight end out of South Alabama, and then they come back and get Cooper Kupp, wide receiver out of Washington. I thought they had better options there when they made that pick. Then you get Josh Reynolds in the fourth round, and then you get a fullback to kind of try and get that running game going again later on. So it was clear they want to get their quarterback some weapons, and they want to get him some help.
Yeah, but when you look at this team, they have two franchise players on offense. You have Goff and you have Gurley. They were 31st last year in rushing. I thought they would have came and got a road grading guard to kind of help their run game.
My issue is their offensive line. And I know they bring in Whitworth in the offseason. They bring in John Sullivan at center. He knows their system. But again, both those guys are older. And even then, you want to bring in younger guys to help kind of see those older guys, how they work, how they're a pro. Let them see that they're an example of that. To me, the weakest spot of this team, they didn't even address in this draft. And I know it was a weak draft for that, but, I mean, come on. They had opportunities to draft guys in the second, third, fourth rounds that I think are quality players that could even help this year. So, disappointed there. Everett at tight end in the second round, their first pick of this draft. Again, other tight ends that I think would have been better fits for what they're looking for if you're looking for something outside of Higbee, not your traditional tight end. To me, not a great draft. So we'll see how these picks pan out.
So again, guys, when you have the worst offensive line in the National Football League, and again, I'm not trying to toot my own horn and I'm not trying to piss people off, but I said this in the beginning of the year, that the Rams are going to struggle because their offensive line, and I knew this after the 49er game. I had hoped that maybe they were going to overachieve for a second straight year, but they didn't. And after the 49er game, I told you guys we had the worst offensive line in football, and everybody jumped on my crap in their comments telling me how great Havenstein is, how Greg Robinson's developing, and all these things. It was Homer talk. It was Homer talk. You were looking with your eyes, and you were not seeing what was on the field. And so many of you wanted to really believe that this offensive line was as good as it was the last year in St. Louis, and it just wasn't. It just overachieved. And, the reality is, and this will be talked about next week, is the Rams' offensive line as bad as it was last year or as good as it was in St. Louis in 2015. And I think the reality is it's somewhere in between. But it is definitely not the type of offensive line that is going to carry this team to the postseason outside of getting help. And they did get some help in free agency. They mentioned that. I will say this about Everett. I heard the Rams and I heard other people that weren't the Rams and mainly other teams in the league say that Gerald Everett fought harder than anybody in this draft after the catch for extra yards. That makes him different than any other tight end in the draft. And that's something that the Rams have not had since the Greatest Show on Turf days. So I'm not as down on the Gerald Everett pick as everybody else. I think that would have been a good third-round pick. I think you could have gotten Cooper Kupp maybe in the fourth round, certainly in the fifth. And I think you probably could have traded away, one of your later picks to move up either back into the second round or get an additional third-round pick. They could have gotten Dan Feeney and John Johnson with those two picks. They would have addressed all three needs. And then they could have gotten Josh Reynolds in the fourth like they did. Or I think he was actually in the fifth round. They got him either with the second pick of the fourth round or the fifth round. I don't have the list in front of me, so forgive me. I don't remember the exact details of when we got him. I know we got Ebikam after we picked up Cooper Kupp. We went back-to-back Eastern Washington picks. I didn't have a problem with the Ebikam pick because I think, and I don't know if I'm saying his name right, but that's how I'm going to pronounce it for the duration of the show so it's consistent. But I do think that was a big signing. Or a big draft pick because it allows for depth in the linebacking core, and that's a position that when our starters go down, we haven't really demonstrated a strong backups at those positions in a long time, and that even goes back to the 80s. The Rams weren't very deep at linebacker. outside of the starters. Certainly the late 80s, once Kevin Green became an everyday starter. You had Fred Strickland, you had Kevin Green, and then it was roaming between Mel Owens. It was roving between Mel Owens and Carl Eckeron, and I'm trying to remember the other guy's name, Frank Stams. There was a few others that were kind of roaming there at the middle, but we always had two good outside linebackers, and then that middle part was always a head scratcher. And we didn't have any depth much behind that. So that's always been a weakness for the Rams. So I'm glad to see them address some depth at the linebacking position because you need a strong front seven. And the Rams have that, but there's not a lot of depth beyond the defensive line. So I don't know, guys. I mean, a D minus is not a good grade. It isn't something to be thankful for. And they're right. The biggest need that the Rams had, they didn't even address in this draft. And they were in position to get who many people felt was the best offensive lineman in this year's draft in Forrest Lamp, and certainly the second best interior offensive lineman in Dan Feeney, in the sense that he can do so many things. He can play center in both guard positions. I would have been happy with one of them, if they decided they didn't want to get both, but the Chargers did. So again, I'm going to hope like hell I'm wrong and hope that those guys turn out to be busts and that the Rams outdid me this go round. But I remind people, in 96, the Rams had an opportunity to do this. They could have had Orlando Pace and Jake Plummer and Eddie George in the same draft. And instead, they got Orlando Pace, Lawrence Phillips, and Tony Banks. And that's just one example. Year in and year out, I've been right on this. The Rams are in a position to draft DeCastro, who's now in Pittsburgh. The Rams passed him up. The Steelers got DeCastro. The Rams could have gotten Staley. They passed him up, and the 49ers got Staley. The Rams could have gotten Patrick Willis instead of Chris Long. They passed him up, and the 49ers got Patrick Willis. So these are just examples over the years of where I said what the Rams should do, and this is just another example of the Rams not following or listening. And I don't know what it is that they see that I don't. It's frustrating. But I'm a firm believer that if your franchise player is a running back, and he is, then you need to make sure that he has the best offensive line in football to run behind. Because when you have the best running back in football running behind the best offensive line in football, you're guaranteed a playoff berth every year. At that point, you're piecing to pieces around him. You're formulating pieces around him to create a championship caliber football team. And the Rams aren't doing it. Now they've got a franchise quarterback, hopefully in Jared Goff, and I believe he is, but they're trying to craft pieces around him, neglecting the fact that if the line doesn't protect him, then the kid doesn't have much of a chance to last too long. Injuries in this league will circumvent a career quicker than anything. We've seen it time and time again. Kurt Warner, the running back of the Seahawks, is a good example of that. He could have been one of the best running backs in football, and injuries absolutely ended him. So, I don't know, guys. I don't know. I'm not going to complain too much more about it because it's over. It's time to move forward. So, without further ado, Cooper Kupp. Let me just start by saying I think Josh Reynolds is going to be something I've never seen before as a Ram fan. Okay? Going back to the 80s and into the 90s, we've always had those mid to shorter wide receivers that were really quick. You had guys like Henry Ellard that was a mid-sized receiver but had really good hands, really good route runners, really good speedsters, but we've never had size as long as I've been alive. Now, maybe they had size, and Jack Snow was a pretty big guy. But Tom Fears, those guys were big guys. But in my lifetime, we haven't had the big target. And I think Reynolds is definitely going to fit that key. And I'm probably more excited for him and the fullback that we picked up than any other position in this year's draft. And I'm happy about that. But I do want to take some time to talk about Cooper Kupp because the reality is we did get him. And Cooper Kupp has been pretty impressive so far in rookie minicamp. Take that for what it's worth. But if he can play as well as he has, and you've got Nelson Spruce, Josh Reynolds, Robert Woods, Tavon Austin. Putting Tavon Austin aside, though, you've got Pharoh Cooper. You have yourself a pretty good wide receiving core. Maybe the Rams don't need to worry about wide receiver now for a few years. But we'll see. So I'm going to play that interview because I think it's important for you guys to get to know the first wide receiver that the Rams drafted under Sean McVay and kind of get a feel for kind of what he's like and what his personality is. Here's the clip.
It's Cooper Kupp, the new Los Angeles Rams. So glad to have you here with us, pal. But I got to tell you, man, I thought we were friends, man. I thought we were boys. You know, we had you in here for the last couple of weeks, and you lied to me. You lied to me on live television last week when you said there was no rhyme or reason to you getting the beach house in Newport for the draft. and here it is. It just happened to work out that the Rams take you in the 3rd round, man. It must have been. It just everything about it had to be perfect.
Yeah, man. It worked out great having family down there, and obviously being able to just take a quick drive up to Thousand Oaks and be able to be up there. So it worked out great.
I was really pumped when I found out they're actually going to paint the Coliseum grass red. Just didn't want to make it comfortable.
Awesome. I'd heard about that, so I'm excited about that too.
Hey, I'm really pumped for you to go in a situation with a young group on offense there with the Rams. You got some good young receivers they bring over, Robert Woods. I'm excited to see you, though, with a quarterback and Jared Goff, who you got to spend a little time with. What was it like when you had a throwing session with Goff leading up to the draft?
Yeah, that was great. We had a really long session, be able to get some good routes and some good work, and really my first time being able to see him on the field and just see the tenacity he has and the drive he has to be great in everything he does. And it was very apparent to me that he is striving for something very special and in leading us to a Super Bowl, multiple Super Bowls. And so, seeing that in him and seeing the drive he has, and that was pretty special. And I'm excited now to be able to throw with him every day.
Yeah, no kidding. And seeing what Sean McVay has done with the Redskins the last couple of years has to have you pretty excited. I mean, and arguably one of the best wide receiving cores a year ago. I mean, what gets you excited when you see how he's able to put the pieces in play on offense?
Yeah, well, I mean, he's a very smart coach. I'm blessed to be able to play underneath him, and excited about the ins and outs, learning the ins and outs of the offense, and the way he's going to be able to utilize all of the guys that we've got. I think we've got a great receiving core, and we'll do some pretty good things this year.
I know you are very meticulous in your preparation, and I know you're a big fan of the game. So have you thought about being inside this division, about maybe an appointment or a date with Mr. Patrick Peterson and Richard Sherman, and does that kind of get you a little more motivated, put in a little extra time?
Yeah, well, that's going to be awesome. I mean, obviously, I'm going to prepare to the best of my abilities and make sure I'm stepping on the field. I've done everything I can to make sure I'm successful, and no matter who I'm lining up against, I'm going to respect who that is, and whether it's PP, Richard Sherman, or whoever else is going to be.
It's pretty cool, though, man.
We've got some great corners in L.A., so be able to go up against some pretty good guys in practice as well.
We talked about that a couple of weeks ago, about some of the corners that you really see as kind of some of the tone setters in the league. Has it kind of hit home yet that you're going to be lining up against these guys here in a couple months?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I don't know if you heard on that call. It wasn't something where it was like overwhelming excitement or anything. Because I've been preparing for this.
Yeah.
Everything I've done, I've been sacrificing, preparing to be able to play this game, and I just need to get a call and know who else I'm be playing for. And so I'm really just excited about going out there and doing that now.
Now you got a mini camp coming up here pretty soon. This rookie mini camp. Now people at home might not know what goes on at that mini camp, but I want to know what goes on from now to the mini camp. What are you doing to get ready to make that first impression?
Hey, well, I'm up in Thousand Oaks, just trying to figure out, what life's like up there a little bit.
Some logistics.
Just kind of figuring out moving my family up there, and I'm working out every day, making sure that when March 11th or when 11th hits, I'm ready to go. I want to make sure I'm good to go physically. Mentally as much as I can. Obviously there's a lot of restrictions, so I'm just excited about being able to eventually be able to get into the playbook and get things going.
Any early indications as to where you see yourself fitting in as a wideout in this offense?
No, I'm going to this thing open-minded, just wherever Coach McVay wants me, wherever they want to do with me. I'm ready to go. So whatever that's going to be, I'm just excited about whatever they want to do.
My last question, real quick: has Eastern Washington already reached out for a donation?
They haven't.
It's coming. No. It's coming very soon. I promise you.
Well, Cooper, we're so happy for you, man. I'm proud of you. It was really fun getting to really know you a little bit better through the course of the last 6-7 weeks, man. We wish you all the best.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
All right, pal.
All right, so likable kid. Definitely a good wide receiver. No one's disputing his ability. They're just disputing when the Rams drafted him and where they drafted him. But that's all water under the bridge now, guys. Complaining about it isn't going to do anything. Let me tell you how the Rams can win, because there is a pathway here. So they talked a little bit about at the end of the clip where he sees himself playing. We'll see. For his rookie year, this is the kind of the way I see the Rams breaking down a little bit. And this is just speculation. This is based on nothing, but this is what I think. The Greg Robinson experiment in the inside is going to depend heavily upon which side. If it were me, and it's not, you've got Whitworth. I'd put Greg Robinson next to him, in between him and Sullivan. Havenstein and Saffold at tackle. You do that, and what you've effectively done is you've protected Greg Robinson, and you've told Havenstein, you had a bad year last year, prove it was a fluke. I think he's had a bad couple of years, but I'll put that aside. New coaching, new mentality. That's your front five. I think your starting tight end is going to be Tyler Higbee, and I think you're going to see Gerald Everett as your number 2. I do think the Rams are going to go a lot of 2 tight end set with just Gurley in the backfield, but we know we got that kid at fullback that I think the Rams are going to do a lot of eye and pro formation and look for that kid to be not only a lead blocker but a pass threat. I see him a lot. I see him playing the role of a young Tom Rathman. That's really the way I see him. You know, Todd Gurley, I've said this before, he reminds me of Lawrence McCutcheon, and it's not just because he wears the same number. And this kid, I think his name's Madison. Forgive me if I don't have that again. I don't have the list in front of me, but I see him playing a lot like Tom Rathman. From all the film that I've seen on the kid, he's a hard runner who can catch and block. And he's a bit of a better runner than a Darryl Johnston, and he's not as good of a blocker, so that's why I fit him in the Tom Rathman category. Your wide receivers, when we go I, is probably unfortunately going to be Tavon Austin at number 2, and number 1 will probably be Robert Woods. When the Rams want to go to a more wide receiver type of position or threat position, I think you're going to see Josh Reynolds in that slot spot, and I think you're going to see Cooper Kupp. I think it's going to be a smorgasbord of Cooper Kupp, Pharoh Cooper, and Nelson Spruce at that 4th wide receiver spot. Look for Cooper Kupp to be kind of a gadget receiver early on until he proves that he can be more, which I think he could be. Pharoh Cooper will probably be eventually exclusive, just an exclusive returner. And I think you're going to see Cooper Kupp eventually take over the slot receiver. Reynolds will eventually replace Tavon Austin. And I think Tavon Austin is on his way out. Unless he has an incredible year this year, I don't foresee McVay sticking with that horse for too long. I don't care that they're paying him $40 million. He wants to win, and he wants to win now. Jared Goff will make Tavon Austin better this year. But again, Tavon Austin's problem has always been not quarterback play necessarily, but his ability to catch the football, as he demonstrated when Goff was finally in the lineup. Goff will be better this year, and because of it, the Rams will be better this year. The offense, if the guys catch the football and if the offensive line can go from the worst in the league to middle of the road, we're talking 15, 16, even 14th in the league. Gurley has a bounce back year. The fullback plays the way I think he can. The Rams could easily go 10-6, 11-5 with a little bit of luck, because you're going to need 1 or 2 of those wins where you're just like, the other team played so poorly the Rams couldn't lose. You need that along the way. The Rams have to eliminate the penalties. They have to. If they don't eliminate the penalties, this team has no chance of winning. The turnovers have to come to a complete halt. They don't have to get it to 0. No one can do that, but they need to limit those turnovers big time. My concern is all on offense. It's not on defense. I think the Rams' defense last year, when they were given time to rest, they were impenetrable. And I believe that's the case now. You add John Johnson on the back end, team him up, put him at the slot corner, or even put him at the number 2 corner with Tremaine Johnson, Marcus Robinson, and Joyner. You've got yourself a phenomenal secondary, and certainly one that can compete. And don't forget, I've said this, but Countess I really like too, and he could end up earning the nickel spot, if not the dime DB spot. So he'll probably get the dime because he'll probably move EJ to nickel. There's opportunities here all over the field, guys, defensively. They just need to be given an opportunity to rest. The Rams have to eliminate the 3 and out. They have to eliminate the 1 and done, turnover, defenses back on the field. They have to sustain drives, and they have to run the football. They do those things, and they have the capability of doing it. It's just a matter of, can they do it? And this is where Goff is going to have to carry the load. He's going to have to convert third down. No matter the situation, he's got to step up and do it. You know, a lot of times, guys, third down feels like, with some quarterbacks like an Aaron Rodgers, it feels like it's inevitable. And we need to get that out of, or at least a good possibility to happen. They're not going to get the inevitable feel yet from Jared Goff. I don't care how good of a year he has this year. He has to do it back-to-back years before you realize, oh, Goff's got this. So the days of us being surprised the Rams have to punt are far from behind us. But the days of us being excited because the Rams are playing a little above their capability or finally to their ability need to get here quickly, or the Rams don't have a chance. Overall, I'm going to say this again. I like the draft picks. Talent-wise, player-wise, I have no issue with the players. My issue all along was what they didn't draft, not what they did draft. And I want to make that clear for you guys that like Cooper Kupp, for those of you that are really high on Josh Reynolds and even Gerald Everett. It's not that I'm not. I don't think these guys are bad players. I don't think these guys are horrible. I don't think they're going to turn out and be, off into oblivion in 2 or 3 years. There's no question they're talented. It's just, did we need to waste the capital on them this year for these players? And did we spend the capital on the wrong positions? That's what I believe. Again, I believe Gerald Everett would have been there later. I believe Cooper Kupp would have been there later. Maybe not John Johnson, and certainly maybe not somebody like Josh Reynolds. But certainly the first 2 picks could have been. And I think that's the part that I find to be the most frustrating. We'll see how this year unfolds. A chance for a winning season is not out of the question. The Rams make those adjustments I just talked about, they have a good shot at winning. If they're going to try to move Greg Robinson to the other tackle position, it's going to be a nightmare. If they don't put Saffold back at right tackle, we're in trouble. But again, we'll see how the Rams do. Obviously, the coaches, one thing I did hear, and you'll hear this later, the coaches feel that this offensive line was poorly coached and that they can improve it just by coaching it. I certainly hope so. But that is a wrap for the 40th episode of LA Rams Central. Next week, segment 1 of 2, in breaking down the interview between Les Snead and Sean McVay, continuing our draft analysis for another 2 weeks. Now it's just basically analysis of the analysis, which is a little tedious, but I think important, because I'm not the only one complaining about this offensive line, as you saw today, as you know from last week, and as you'll know from next week. So, without further ado, thanks for watching. God bless you, and thank you for watching LA Rams Central.